Welcome back to Expertise Part 3, Missing Mastery. Our modes of education aim to expedite, to save labor, to do for masses what cannot be done for masses, what must be done reverently, one by one. Say, rather, the whole world is needed for the tuition of each pupil. Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'll tell you a thing teachers do that you may have never thought of. It is a thing indicative of the problem with the industrial model of schools that we have inherited in modern America. Picture a teacher at his desk with a massive stack of papers to grade. Let's say the assignment was a 10-question quiz, and the teacher is racing to get them all finished before the factory bell chimes and the new wave of students rolls in from down the line. What does he do? Does he take Timmy's paper and grade question 1, then question 2, then 3, and so on, all the way down to 10, at which time he reviews the checks and X's and sees that Timmy missed all 4 questions about adverbs, but he got all 6 questions right that dealt with adjectives. The teacher puts a 60 at the top of Timmy's paper and makes a mental note that Timmy gets adjectives but needs help with adverbs. Timmy failed the quiz, but the quiz has actually been a success for the teacher. The point of assessments is, after all, to see what each kid knows and can do, and conversely, what each kid doesn't know and cannot yet do, so that the teacher can coach him forward based on what he needs. Excellent! Except for one thing. This is not actually how Mr. Gradgrind will grade that stack of papers. There's simply too many papers and not enough time. Efficiency, man! Efficiency! The teacher will instead do like all industrialists and compartmentalize, specialize. He will grade question 1 on Timmy's paper, then flip. Question 1 on Sally's paper, then flip. Question 1 on Sue's, and on through the stack. Not too far in, and he'll have the answer to question 1 memorized. And when that happens, he's really flying. Check, 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 X, check, check, X. And it's all for just question 1 through the stack, through the stack, through the stack. Once that's done 100 times over, he then goes to question 2 and repeats the process. This kid got it, this kid missed it, on, quickly. It is, I can attest, a much faster way to grade papers. It is also a method emblematic of the general ethos of modern schools. It captures on a small scale what I think we are doing wrong on the large scale nationwide. The fact is that in his race through all the question 1s in the stack, the teacher completely loses sight of the individual. When he marks an X and flips to the next paper, he has no idea whether that X was for Jack or Jill. And when he's speeding through, say, question 8, he'll have no idea which kids are doing well on the quiz or which ones have missed all 8 questions so far. It's like a man tightening one bolt over and over just to send it on down the assembly line. He might elbow his buddy one day, "Hey, what do you suppose we're building? What comes out at the end of this line?" To which his buddy naturally replies, "Who knows? Stay focused. They're starting to stack up." A teacher who grades his stack 1 question at a time, and yes, I do it that way, will at best have sort of a composite sense at the end of each run. Hey, I marked a lot of X's on that question. We'd better have another lesson on, let's see, what was question 6 about? Oh, adverbs. Thus, we arrive now at the almighty data. A hot thing in education. And look, I'm sure it is a good thing for moving machines and merchandise, but it is a sadly impersonal tool for raising up children. With data in this sense, whatever you hold constant is what you're caring about. We missed a lot of question 6s, so we'd better remediate adverbs. And thus question 6 comes to replace little Timmy, whom I no longer see at all. Do you catch that? The shift is toward the collective, the group. Data speaks of the class or cohort or this or that demographic or subgroup. It cannot speak to little Timmy. I remember a very telling moment my first year teaching. I was fresh out of college, a convenient time for me, by the way, because I knew everything. And I had 5 or 6 classes of 6th graders to teach every day. This totaled to something like 120 students, I think. My course was English composition, which was at that school, at that time, a separate class from reading. In other words, I was to help these kids with their grammar and writing. Another teacher would give them their literature. The lessons I cooked up that year, I remember them well. Things to keep the whole class engaged. Things to make writing fun. Story chains and pass-the-paper debates and interactive rubrics and highlighter feedback and trivia challenges and activities and do numbers 1 through 20 on page 296 and finish workbook exercise 7B on page 388 and on and on. Keep 'em busy. On Saturdays, though, I offered what I called office hours at the downtown library from 9 to noon. It's laughable now for me to think of that. I had carried the collegiate model of office hours to the 6th grade world. It's also pretty incomprehensible to me now that I had such time and energy back then, teaching a full load from 8 to 3 on weekdays, as well as coaching football every day after school, and then to volunteer my Saturday mornings away. Yeesh. Anyway, very few kids ever came to office hours, but I well remember my first customer. His mom was legitimately concerned about her son falling behind in writing, and she really wanted him to get better. Can you help him with writing essays? Absolutely. Thanks for bringing him. The kid sat there in the chair across the table from me. I opened my briefcase. I had a sure enough briefcase in those days to complete my charade of serious pedagogue. The 6th graders always thought it was full of cash. Go figure. I pulled out from my briefcase the only materials I had, certainly no cash, but notebook paper and pencils. There were no workbooks or textbooks or worksheets, no games or display boards, just paper and pencils. I remember well the feeling in that moment. I passed the paper to the kid, and then it hit me like a shelf of books. I don't know what to do. I mean it. It was in that moment that I realized I didn't know a thing about teaching writing, and yet I'd been teaching writing, quote unquote, all year. I'd been training to teach writing for 4 years at college, and the training had grown quite specialized and intense my senior year as I did my student teaching. I mean, dang, I should know how to help this kid with his essays. And the scenario there at that library table really was ideal for it, or should have been. As much as everyone complains of class sizes, red tape, discipline, detentions, and the like, this moment was a dream, for it had none of that. It was just teacher, student, paper, pencil, period. Even so, I could only draw a blank. The fact is, that the dance we teachers do in a classroom of 30 fidgety kids is not exactly teaching in the purest sense. And this moment in the library, a moment that forced my focus not on the class as a group, but on the individual, and not on the lesson plan or activity, but on the actual subject, in this case writing, illuminated the great chasm between the two. I've heard similar stories from teachers who, paradoxically, complain of how awkward it is when a scheduling anomaly leaves them with a particularly small class, say just 8 or so kids. This does happen sometimes, and truly, a teacher's whole approach has to change from whatever he's been doing for a class of 30. You just don't teach 8 kids that way. My grandmother, a renowned former teacher in our area, a local legend, gave me 2 pieces of advice when I first started teaching back in 2009. 1, don't hold grudges. And 2, enjoy small victories. Now, that second bit, I rather doubted at the time. Small nothing, I'm going to reach and teach all these kids. I see now, though, that she was exactly right. Even in a crowded classroom, you're only teaching the one child. Which brings me back to the kid in the library. Now, to clarify, if I was put at that same table today, I think I could do something for him. But the reason is because since then I've grown as a writer, and that, I think, is the key point. I could come up with something meaningful to do one-on-one at that table with that blank notebook paper now, not so much because I've grown as a teacher. It's not a pedagogical thing, really. But it's because I've grown in the subject being taught. Maybe that's the prescription to our problem. Incidentally, this is why whenever my colleagues start looking at master's and specialist programs to pursue further degrees, which on the Georgia teacher's pay scale, you pretty much have to, it leads to significant salary increases. But when they come to those decision-making moments, I try to encourage them to do their postgraduate work in the field that they teach, and not in the field of teaching as such. If you teach math, I say get a master's in the field of math. If you teach history, get a master's in history. If you teach English, go study literature or writing. This is typically, to you and your students, a greater advantage than if you go for, say, curriculum, instruction, etc. Now, a caveat. Of course, teachers should be trained in teaching, just as pilots should be trained in flying. And of course, a great deal of your practical decision-making for postgraduate work depends on what your undergraduate focus was. Did you major in English or English education? A popular practice nowadays is what's called the provisional certificate, which allows college grads full charge of a public school classroom, even if they've had 0 teacher training, so long as they are actively pursuing teacher training at the time. Perhaps a master's in curriculum or something. We do the same thing with pilots, I think. All right, you can take off right away, but you have got to go to flight school before you land. Excellent. Look, I mean no offense by any of this. I know many great teachers. In fact, some of the best, who started on just such a provisional certificate route, and after surviving the initial baptism by fire that it entails, they went on to thrive as educators. Similarly, I know great folks who pursued graduate degrees in pedagogical studies rather than in their actual field, and they have become better for it. There's much to learn. All I'm saying is that such routes are not my vision of the ideal. Kids come to school, or probably a better way to picture it, a kid comes to school to learn something, not to learn about learning. The latter will happen incidentally as the child journeys toward mastery in whatever it is we're teaching. Emerson said all of this in the 19th century when the Industrial Revolution was swallowing schools as rapidly as it swallowed workers. Quote, "The teaching," says Emerson, "comes to be arranged for these many and not for those few. Hence, the instruction seems to require skillful tutors of accurate and systematic mind rather than ardent and inventive masters." End quote. To put it another way, let's say you wanted to get better at writing, for instance. Would you rather spend a week with a trained pedagogue or with John Steinbeck? For me, I could put up with the secondhand smoke. Let's have Steinbeck. Now, I have heard the argument that some geniuses in their field, are not necessarily able to teach what they know. Fair enough. But also, I would argue, rare enough. Let's say I wanted to learn how to weld. Put me in a workshop with a master welder, and I'm sure I'll learn. If given my ruthers, I'd take that over a tech school course any day. Though, on second thought, only the tech school can give me the credentialed certificate, so here we are. Seriously, though, the apprenticeship with the master welder would most likely produce another master welder, regardless of the tutor's prowess at tutoring. Mastery is wonderfully contagious, and thus the man's pedagogy would come as the most natural thing in the world. I'll give you an example. For all the science and training and talk in teacher schools about assessments, a grand topic in the world of education, there in that welder's shop, assessment would ride in quite naturally, quite easily, on the back of intuition. Of course, the master will watch the apprentice's fumbling attempt at some new technique, and of course he will correct and coach accordingly. What else is there? As it turns out, all the hubbub about assessments in the school machine is actually a hubbub about assessments for the masses. It's not testing as such that requires such a science. It's testing large numbers efficiently and being able to squeeze from that testing the meaningful data that is the new produce, the desired harvest of the American schooling fields. And what a crop we've chosen, the canned fruit over the fresh. I say again that for the master and apprentice, assessments will come so naturally as part of the learning and almost indistinguishable from it. I say, too, that the teaching itself, the desire to impart, does also come quite naturally as breathing. Sure, yes, there are eccentrics who prefer to be left alone in their laboratories, and certainly there are people who simply have no patience with people, which is something you have to have teaching. But on the whole, a human who is good at something wants to show someone else how to do that something, whatever it is. This is why there are YouTube videos on how to do any and everything, and they're made by unpaid amateurs. Why do we make them? I've made them before. I have no idea. Perhaps in this sense alone, we humans are innately, reflexively, unresistingly charitable. Try it. Go ask your next door neighbor something as mundane as, hey, how do you sharpen your lawnmower blades? And a tutorial will happily ensue. I guarantee it. I myself have on several occasions driven across the state for no better reason than that there was an opportunity to speak on literature and or writing. Not a dime paid, but I went. I went to these as some men go to golf courses or deer hunts. I just love it. Similarly, in my day-to-day job, though of course I do get paid for that, I realized that I could do a lot less for the same amount of money. Most teachers could, but they don't. And it's worth a moment to ask why. I mean, for me specifically, being a writing teacher, I could do a lot more of those 10-question quizzes and not bother with all the essays, stories, poems, and screenplays. It would be a heck of a lot easier for me to tackle, 100 multiple-choice quizzes, rapid fire, bam, 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 than to stare down a stack of 100 fairy tales, which requires such time and concentration. Alas, just such a stack stares at me even as I write this. The kids just turned in their midterm exams, the biggest essay of the year. This is not to boast, except maybe to boast on many great teachers that I know as a whole who go well above and beyond what they could get by with. But beyond that, the fact simply is that as I get lost, and this is just for me, As I get lost in the tangle of bureaucracy, state testing, and the infinitely complex state ELA standards, ever a moving target, by the way, my only way to come up for air is to just get back to the one basic thing. Help these kids get better at writing, at clarity of thought and expression. That, I know, is important. Of course, that is also under the axe. For just as the Scantron machine made multiple choice assessments gradable with the rapidity of a machine gun, now, I kid you not, AI software will grade student essays in a click. Bam! Here's what you made, and here's some human-sounding feedback to tell you what you did well and what you could do better, even with some encouraging words straight from the computer. And why not? I mean, it's nice to a kid to get quick, immediate AI feedback on the essay that he had AI write for him in the first place. My question is, what are we doing? What's it all about, life and learning? What are we doing it for? I started this series with a probably inadequate explanation of that sweet feeling of resistance when a man first encroaches the sacred space of mastery in any given field. And I end by saying that if we give degrees and diplomas without kids ever getting a taste of that feeling, we have given stones for bread and serpents for fish. Perhaps our culture latches nowadays so passionately to sports because that's the only place on campus where that sweet spot can be reached. Even the most open-minded of sports fans would rebel the minute an AI robot began running touchdowns against the human defense. You have to be good at the game yourself. Perhaps that's the allure of sports, because on the field, that's where it can be reached. That resistance, that sweet spot where time slows in salute of skill and mediocrity gives way to mastery.